you, remember, to vote in September, on September the 18th, you have to be on the electoral register. If any of you are not, or if you're a young voter who is not yet registered, at the end, we'll have somebody on the table at the back there with electoral registration forms. Please stop and take the time to fill in those forms. Remember, if you're not on the electoral register, you can't vote in September. The cut-off date for that is the 2nd of September. If you are 16 or 17 or will be on that date, you're entitled to be on the electoral register, so please take the time to fill in the forms at the back. So without any further ado, please welcome Tommy Sheridan.
Thanks very much, folks. I'm trying to learn from some of the comments that I've received, overwhelmingly positive, 99% positive in relation to the speech in Kirkcaldy, which has been so well received. But one of the often repeated comments was that I shouted too much. So I'm going to try not to shout tonight. Often people remark that I don't seem to use notes either. So I thought, I'm going to actually use some notes tonight, and I looked out about 24 pages worth of notes, and then I've turned up and there's no lectern, so it looks like I'll not be using notes tonight either. The reason I was looking for some notes was I wanted to try and find one wee statistic which highlighted the reason we're here tonight and the reason we're about to have the opportunity to change our lives forever in September 18th. One wee statistic which sort of summed up why we're here. And I was looking for all of the propaganda that we get. You know, we're all in it together, aren't we? Yeah. Austerity. We all are in it together according to the Tories. And I looked at the House of Commons figures for last year. £1.4 million spent in Chardonnay. £1.4 million subsidised 7 bars Chardonnay. We're all in it together. We're all in it together, brothers and sisters, when Oxfam, who produced a stunning report which revealed that across the world we now have 85 families, and I gave this statistic on the 23rd of January in Kirkcaldy, 85 families, easily squeeze them in here, with a combined wealth in excess of half the world's population. 85 people with a combined wealth greater than 3.5 billion people. That's the level of inequality that we have facing us today. And then I checked a website for an American senator called Bernie Sanders, who carries a lot of very interesting stuff. I'd recommend it to you. And Bernie's updated it. It's not 85 families any longer. The concentration of wealth that Oxfam was referring to was 2013. Sanders has updated it for 2014. It's now 67 families, such is the concentration of wealth. 67 families with wealth more than 3.5 billion people. Oxfam just done another report last week. Five families in Britain have a greater amount of wealth now than 12.5 million people in Britain. 5 families. But we're all in it together. Brothers and sisters, austerity should be defined as punishing the poor for the mistakes and the greed of the rich. That's what austerity represents. Because when you read the report at the end of the year, when the European Parliament decided that it was going to introduce a cap, on bankers' bonuses. It was going to introduce a cap that said bankers should not be given in bonuses more than their annual salary, or £1 million. So they were going to cap bankers' bonuses. And what did the British government do? The British government decided to raise the matter with the European commissioners and say that they were going to defy it, that they were not going to have any cap on bankers' bonuses. Because the truth is, the level of bonuses for bankers today in Britain is greater now than it was in 2008, before we bailed them out to the tune of £1.2 trillion. These fat cats have got their troughs well and truly up to their armpits with their bonuses, taking more and more out of the public purse, but telling everybody else there's no enough for wages, there's no enough for benefits. They voted the other day to cap the welfare benefits for the poor, but they're fighting against the bankers' cap for bonuses. That highlights the nonsense of we're all in it together. You know, I watched today, I don't know if any of you got the chance, but I'm not usually in on a Thursday. But I managed to be in today, and I watched the confrontation between one millionaire and another millionaire. One was the leader of the Tories, the other was the leader of the Labour Party. Two millionaires, it's like baldy men fighting over a comb, some of the arguments there. And this absolute out-of-touch idiot Cameron, this Etonian millionaire, by the way, 29 members of that cabinet, 29 members, 23 of them personal millionaires. What do they know about working hard to try and look after your family? What do they know about living in low pay? What do they know about zero contracts? What do they know about benefits? What do they know about policies like the bedroom tax, where they're trying to punish the poor and the disabled for the crime of being poor and disabled? A bedroom tax, they tell us, it's a spare room subsidy. They tell us that people should be moved out their house if they've got a spare bedroom. Doesn't matter that they store their disabled equipment in it. Doesn't matter that they may be separated from their partner and they take their children at the weekend. Doesn't matter that they're a grandparent and they take the kids to help their sons and daughters in order to keep them in work. Doesn't matter. They get punished because they're poor. Spare room subsidies. Why don't we tax the mansions instead of taxing the poor, brothers and sisters? That's where you would get the money from. You listen to him today, talking about the sell-off of the post office. What a scandal! We have just had the biggest theft in British history. Because in 2008, the banks went into meltdown. And they went into meltdown, why? Because they were greedy. They wanted to make more and more money. So what they did is they threw money at people. It didn't matter if you could pay your mortgage or no. What, is that your salary? No problem, we'll give you 5 times your salary. What chance have you got of paying back a loan like that? Didn't matter. As long as they were getting the wee house of blood out you, they were throwing the money at you. Hand over fist to make more and more money. And of course, that whole bubble burst. And they were heading for the knackers yard politically, weren't they? And of course, what happened? What happened in areas like this when they said the mines were uneconomical? What happened when they said the mills were uneconomical? What happened when they said the steel yards were uneconomical? What happened when they said the shipyards were uneconomical? What happened is they let them go to the wall. They let them close with the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs and skills, real skills. You remember the days when people used to make things. We used to be known for making things. Now all we're known for is answering the phone to one another and selling services to one another. We had this situation in 2008 where the banks were uneconomical. And what happened? They weren't allowed to go to the wall. They were bailed out by your money. Each and every one of you contributed to that £1.2 trillion bailout of the banks. Brothers and sisters, instead of bailing out the banks and then putting the bankers back in charge, We should have bailed out the banks and put the bankers in jail. That's where they belong. For robbing people blind with a mis-selling of pensions, mis-selling of loans, the LIBOR scandals. I've got to laugh. Every single day in the gutter press, you've got some poor lassie or boy that's been caught claiming money and working. And he gets absolutely crucified for it. And of course, usually they get prosecuted for it. And usually they get put in jail for it. I've got a picture here. One of the Tory ministers. One of the Tory ministers has been caught claiming £90,000 for a second house that her parents lived in. Her parents lived in it. £90,000, what happened? We slap the wrist, pay the money back. What happens if you're a working class woman or a working class guy and it's caught claiming benefit while you're working? You're sent to the jail. Your life is ruined. That's the reality of the two Britons that we live in today. The one Britain for them and the one Britain for us. Brothers and sisters, that's why. That's why we have an opportunity here in 6 months' time to put an end to it. You see, I think the campaign against independence should, of course, be referred to with the name that they gave themselves. Project Fear. Project Fear, because every single time you hear an argument against independence, it's about frightening you. We're no big enough. We're no rich enough. We're no smart enough. Brothers and sisters, I think we have an opportunity now to prove to ourselves and to prove to the rest of the world that we are big enough. We are smart enough. And we're courageous enough to break out of the shackles that has been imposed on us by Westminster rule. I refer to this vote as a freedom vote. And some people say, "Ah, Tommy, you're not going a wee bit too far there. You know, freedom, it gives a connotation of tyranny." Well, not exactly in shackles. Brothers and sisters, tyranny comes in many shapes and forms. The reason it's correct to refer to it as a freedom vote is because if we vote on 18th of September for independence, we will be free to get rid of the immoral, wasteful weapons in the Clyde, and instead of spending billions of pounds in scrap metal, we can spend it on nurses and doctors and hospitals and schools. That's what we can do with our money. STUC the Scottish Trade Union Congress did a detailed report in 1998 into weapons diversification. They looked at the number of people that were directly employed at Faz Lane and the amount of money that was spent in employing those workers at Faz Lane. They concluded that there were 1,600 workers, 1,600 workers directly employed at Faz Lane, but it was taking up £30,000 million a year. They estimate that if any local authority in Scotland had that money to spend, they would employ at least 40,000 workers a year. In other words, we're no closing down Faz Lane and shipping those immoral, illegal weapons of mass destruction out of Scotland to get rid of jobs. We're closing it down and getting rid of those immoral weapons to create jobs and to invest in socially useful production. That's what disarmament means. And the sad thing is, brothers and sisters, that's exactly what the Labour Party used to stand for as well. They used to be for unilateral nuclear disarmament. They used to be for investing in jobs, not in bombs. Come the 19th of September, if we've been brave enough 24 hours earlier, we will be free to get rid of those weapons of mass destruction. Brothers and sisters, we will be free to reverse the scandal, the absolute scandal that was referred to today, of the sell-off of our Royal Mail, sell-off of the publicly owned postal service. A service which has served us well now for hundreds of years. A service that everybody recognises. In order to pay for one first-class stamp, one second-class stamp, so that it gets delivered anywhere, then you have to be able to cross-subsidise. You have to be able to invest in the areas where it's further to get to, harder to reach. That's the beauty of the public service, which is the mail service. And these bandits had the cheek, after what they'd done to us in relation to the rip-off of the banks, these bandits had the cheek to say to 16 investors, by the way, why don't we give you preferential treatment? You can be the first to buy the shares, but you need to keep them for a wee while longer. You need to keep them for about a year. What did they do? They got preferential treatment. They bought shares that were woefully undervalued. They sold them within weeks. They made £300 million. One of George Osborne's mates, a best man at his wedding, who's in charge of one of the investment funds, personally made £26 million. £26 million. George Osborne's best man. Brothers and sisters, they talk about the scroungers in society. These are the scroungers in society. These are the people that we should be bringing to book. We on the 19th of September will be able to say loud and clear, hands off, our mail service is staying in the public sector where it belongs. We'll be able to say in the 19th of September, we will be free to continue to invest in a publicly owned national health service. Somebody said to me, asked me a wee question on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, Tommy, I'm worried about independence. What's going to happen to our health service? And I made the point, here and now, under the Scottish Parliament, we run our health service, and there are problems, of course there are. There are always problems when you've got too many managers, and not enough ancillary staff, and not enough nurses, and not enough of those that actually do the work. But what we've got to say is, if you compare our health service with the health service in England right now, it is being sold off every single day of the week. Sold off to the friends of the Tory party, their big business friends who run the private health insurance companies. That health service is under real threat. You want to save your health service? Vote for independence, brothers and sisters. That's how you're going to save your health service. We will be free. We will be free to assess one of the single biggest problems that confronts us as a society. You see, what that report that I mentioned earlier, the New Oxfam report, uncovers, is that over a half of Britain's poor are no longer those who benefit. They're those who are working. What we've got is a scandal of low pay. A scandal of in-work benefits. Wouldn't it be better, instead of throwing hundreds of millions of pounds subsidising poverty pay employers like your Asdas and your Morrisons and your Amazons, wouldn't it be better to introduce a living legal minimum wage that these companies were forced to pay? That's what we should be doing to tackle poverty pay. And by the way, there are some people, understandably and even acceptably, there are some people who run businesses and say, Tommy, I only employ 10 people, I'm working hard, I can't afford that legally minimum living wage. What we should be doing is we should be saying, fine, here's the application form, we will subsidise you as a business in order to pay the proper wage, instead of forcing the individual to go through the means test, the embarrassing means test, jumping through all the hoops in order to qualify for housing benefit, council tax rebate, working families tax credit. Wouldn't it be better instead if you just had a wage packet that actually reflected the cost of living? That's what we're free to recognise in an independent Scotland. That we can be committed to a living wage. Brothers and sisters, the reason I've chosen those topics, just for starters, is because they're in the white paper that the SNP have produced. I'm not in the SNP. I recognise and applaud the role that the SNP has played over many years in keeping the issue of independence alive. No problem with applauding that. But the SNP and I will have differences after independence. So far we're agreed, because the three things that I've talked about are commitments that are in the white paper. And by the way, they're enough to vote for independence. They're enough on their own to vote for independence. But the beauty of the Yes movement is we have diversity. We have different views. We all agree that we need freedom. Some of us want to use that freedom to do a wee bit extra. I've got to say to you, I'm a socialist. I believe fundamentally that the wealth of Scotland should be publicly owned and controlled for the benefit of the people of Scotland. That's what makes me a socialist. You see, I look at our marvellous resources. I look at that oil. I look at the gas. I look at the electricity. I look at our ability to be self-sufficient on energy production, our ability to export energy, our ability to develop new forms of cleaner energy production, wind, wave, solar. I look at all of that and I think to myself, those are the essentials of life. I'm not interested as a socialist in the local fish and chip shop or the taxi firm down the road. What I'm interested in is that the things that are essential to life are run for the maximum benefit of the people, not for the maximum profit of the fat cats. That's the difference, brothers and sisters. That's why the gas, the electricity, the oil, the railways, the buses, these things should be run on the basis of the best possible, safest possible public service. And of course, the truth is, we will be able to use, you look at the big six as they're called, the energy companies, the big six, 4 years, the last 4 years, the profits have went from £322 million 4 years ago to 1,200 million last year. 1,200 million profit. By the way, how could you not make profit selling gas and electricity? For goodness sakes, it's not as if you get home in the night and you think to yourself, I'm not going to use any electricity. I'm not going to use any gas. I mean, you might have an all-electric house, but it's very, very unlikely. These are the things that are the essentials of life. Why the hell are we allowing them to be in private hands? They should be public policies. And you know, the other thing that the vote will give us is the freedom to retain our water in public hands. I often find it incredible. You know, that in England and Wales, the water's private. Privatised. I mean, for God's sake, oh, we got a lot of Scotland. We moan a lot, but hey, we've got more water than moans, haven't we? We've got more than enough, an abundance of rain, an abundance of water. Why the hell should they get away with it down there? Think about it. You get in for the night's meeting, you can't even wash your hands and flush the toilet, but you're making money for a private company down there. That's what they want to bring up here. They're not on. They're not on. Independence protects the publicly owned water and sewerage services. And let's get a wee message to Mr. Miliband, who tried to attack the Tories the day for the disgraceful sell-off on the cheap of the mail services. What I listened for as I was watching that debate, what I listened for but never heard, was the commitment for Miliband that he was going to take the mail back into public ownership. Because they don't have the bottle, they don't have the backbone. What would transform the fortunes of the Labour Party as if they had the bottle and the backbone to stand up in that parliament and say, when we get into power, we are taking back what was stolen from the people. We're taking back the railways. We're taking back the gas. We're taking back the electricity. That would transform them. But the truth is there are shivers that are running up and down the green benches of Parliament, looking to attach themselves to a spine in the Labour benches, and they can't find one. That's the problem. You have a situation where I saw one Labour member from Glasgow South Side, who stood up today when everybody was attacking the Tories for the theft of the mail services, and he attacked the SNP. Now, personally, I don't actually want to cut corporation tax. I just want the businesses to pay their bloody corporation tax. That would be a start. Then he got up and he attacked the SNP and said they were like the Tories because they want to cut corporation tax. This is the same guy who represents Glasgow South with a poverty level among children of 38%, who voted last week for a welfare cap. Voted to cut welfare. Well, the Child Poverty Action Group in Scotland have said 50,000 children in Scotland are going to be driven into poverty because of these welfare cuts, and he gets up and votes for it. Out of the whole Labour Party, 7 rebels, that was all. 7 rebels. Only 2 in Scotland that had the bottle to say, no, we're not going to support your attack on welfare. We're not going to allow you to scapegoat those in receipt of benefits, because that's what it's about, isn't it? How dare they attack those in benefits and blame them for the problems, when it's the bankers and the bosses that should be getting the blame, not the benefit recipients? Why have they not got the bottle to stand up and say that, brothers and sisters? That's why we're in the situation we're in. We're in a situation now where if we vote on 18th September for freedom from Westminster, then we can start to do things differently here in Scotland. We can look at child poverty. We can look at pensioner poverty. We can look at the level of the minimum wage. And you see, for me, independence isn't just about changing the flag that's going to fly above the municipal chambers across Scotland. Independence is about changing the size of the pension that we give our pensioners. It's about changing the level of minimum wage. It's about changing the scandal of child poverty that scars a country like ours, that is rich in resources, and yet 1/4 of its wains live in poverty, and in some constituencies, like the Glasgow East, Margaret Curran votes for the welfare cap. 43% of the wains living in poverty, but she votes for a welfare cap. She was on the radio the other day talking about how the SNP are out of touch with ordinary people. I tell you what, I think when they go to that Westminster Parliament, they all get a tablet. It's a Space Cadet tablet. Because that's what they all become, Space Cadets. Out of touch with ordinary people's lives. Brothers and sisters, we have got this opportunity. And you know, I've listened to some arguments from some people whom I've got time for. Some people who argue, Tommy, are we not abandoning the working class of England and Wales? By voting for independence, does that not make you a nationalist, and even a narrow nationalist? Well, brothers and sisters, first and foremost, England and Wales, in relation to the last 4 Labour governments, has not relied on Scotland's votes. So the idea that there would never be a Labour government if Scotland goes independent is just Tommy rot. It's just rubbish. So we're not abandoning them. On the contrary, I think we can inspire them. I think we can show here in Scotland that it is possible to reject the neoliberal consensus of Westminster and instead have a country that's based on social need, not on private profit. We can build a country, brothers and sisters. We can build a country that promotes peace across the world, tolerance, diversity, a country that doesn't tolerate poverty, a country that places people at its heart. That would inspire the people of England and Wales. If they can do it in Scotland, we can do it here as well. But I'll tell you what else I would say to those who would have us believe that it makes you a narrow nationalist to support independence. That's a two-sided coin, that. On the other side of the coin, if you're going to vote no, brothers and sisters, I'm afraid you're going to have to accept that it makes you a nationalist as well. It makes you a British nationalist because it means you want to maintain that British nationalism. And quite frankly, those on the left who attack people like me, they would run a mile from that description. Well, if they don't want that description, they should stop their nonsense in relation to narrow nationalism for voting yes. The truth of the matter is, if you have got any vestige of progression in your mind, if you've got any vestige of political nous, you would recognise that this vote on September 18th isn't about narrow nationalism. It's about opening Scotland up to the world as a beacon of social justice. That's what it's about. It's about making us proud of our country, proud of what we do with our resources, proud of what we do in relation to how we treat one another and our relationship with the rest of the world. That's what we mean by freedom. Freedom to do all of those things. And I've said before, and quite rightly somebody did pull me up about this, because I said, we'll be voting for independence, so there'll be no more Tory governments. And somebody said, but Tommy, the Tories get, okay, put things into perspective. I was on a TV show last night, and we were discussing the Tories being routed in the 1987 general election. They went from 21 members of Parliament to 10 members of Parliament. And it was called a routing. And I thought to myself, what the Tories would give the day for a routing. 10 members of Parliament compared to them being outnumbered the day by the pandas at Edinburgh Zoo. That's what we mean by a routing. So I'm going to restate that point. We will be free in an independent Scotland. Never ever to have another Tory government unless the people of Scotland vote for that Tory government. That's the point. Our freedom, therefore, our freedom will be never ever to have foisted upon us a government that we didn't vote for. Brothers and sisters, why would you reject that? Why would you reject that opportunity, that basic freedom, democratic freedom? You know, that show was about 25 years since he introduced the poll tax. And they were talking about the legacy, and I think the legacy is this referendum. Because I think the poll tax brought home to millions just how big the democratic deficit actually was here in Scotland. Because in that 1987 general election, the Tories went from 21 members of Parliament to 10, and yet within 2 years they decided to introduce the community charge in Scotland first. I've got to laugh with Malcolm Ruffin last night, you know. He said, oh, it wasn't us down in England, it was the Tories in Scotland. I thought, for God's sake, you used to defend the poll tax. Now you're actually fighting about who to blame within the Tory party for the poll tax. That's how bad that is. Yeah, a couple of years not be the same with the bedroom tax. We've got a situation where that poll tax battle showed people how little disregard these Westminster Tories had for us. And then, let's be clear about it, the other individual responsible for what I think will be a decisive vote for independence on 18th of September. The other individual responsible is Tony Blair. Tony Blair. Because let's be honest about it, we're all working class folk here. 1997, I remember my old man, worked in Rolls Royce all his life, Rolls Royce in Hillington, and I've been political for most of my life, so when Tony Blair got elected, I wasn't celebrating because I'd already listened to his speeches about how he was getting rid of Clause 4, Part 4. It was a bit like a church minister asking you to keep coming to church even though he didn't believe in God any longer. The Labour Party was bereft of ideas and principles as soon as they got rid of Clause 4, Part 4. Because they didn't believe in public ownership, they didn't believe in socialism. So, I wasn't celebrating when Tony Blair was elected, but you know, let's be honest, I'm a wee bit weird. Because I'm actually involved in politics, and I read about politics, and I'm very, very politically active. The truth is, there's probably about 5% of the population like that. The overwhelming majority of the population are just getting on with their daily lives, trying to make ends meet, trying to make sure their kids have got a better existence than they had, trying to make sure that your children are not just safe, but they've got the opportunity to realise all their talents. That's what most people do, isn't it? Me, on the other hand, I'm reading all the papers, Guardian, Financial Times, all the rest of it. But my dad, 1997, he said, "I'm very happy, son. Labour have won the election." I said, "Dad, what are you happy about? You know, Tony Blair's a bloody numpty. He's just a Tory in disguise. He's not going to do anything." And my dad said, "Oh, son, he just said that to get into power. Once they're in, they'll do things for the working man." And I'm not slagging my dad, because I think that view was shared by a lot of people. A lot of people had expectations. At long last, the darkness of the Tory years was over. Here was going to be the brightness of a Labour government. Brothers and sisters, 13 years later, more poverty, more inequality, more self-serving politicians that were feeding their own bank accounts rather than other people's, and of course, taking us into illegal wars on a false prospectus of lies. I remember his speech talking about how he would fight for every drip of blood in order for democracy. Of course, what he never said is as long as it was somebody else's blood that was getting spilled. I stood in the Scottish Parliament. I always remember getting the opportunity in 1999 when I was elected to the Parliament, and I kept a commitment that I'd made to people who had helped get me elected, that I was going to try and get rid of pindings and warrant sales. Some of you who are more mature in the audience tonight will remember what pindings and warrant sales were all about. Public humiliation. Nothing to do with collecting debt, because they never ever collected the debt, but what they did do is they embarrassed you. They forced you to go to money lenders so that you didn't have a pinding and a warrant sale. And I was fortunate enough to have a bill in the Scottish Parliament, private member's bill, that was successful. And we were able to abolish pindings and warrant sales. And I was very glad that the Scottish Parliament had been formed, and it showed that it could work. Here was something that was ignored by Westminster for 200 years. We'd managed to do it within 18 months. Get rid of pindings and warrant sales. Excellent. Brothers and sisters, in 2003, in February 2003, the limitations of the Scottish Parliament were illustrated. When I got up along with others, and I said loud and clear during the debate on the Iraq war that was pending, I said, anyone in this chamber or this country who thinks this war is about weapons of mass destruction should waken up and smell the oil. Because that's what that war was all about. That war committed hundreds and thousands of young working class kids to go and fight on the basis of a lie, many of whom never returned. Brothers and sisters, it is to our eternal shame that the Scottish Parliament could vote against the war in Iraq and be ignored, and young Scottish troops were sent anyway. Let's, on the 18th of September, vote for the freedom never to send our young kids into any other illegal wars. In my contribution, brothers and sisters, and hopefully we can have some questions, and I'll try as best I can to answer them. I do have to make the point that I made in Kirkcaldy. There is a lot of talk, particularly by the Project Fear No campaign, about the uncertainties of independence. Uncertainties over currency, uncertainties over companies. Of course, there's no uncertainty about who's behind it. It's the British establishment coming together. Tories, Labour, Liberals coming together to try and frighten everybody into rejecting independence. We cannot stand here and say that we will dot every I, cross every T about what an independent Scotland's going to be like. I'll tell you what we can do with certainty. We can remind you that 60% of the Tory government's current level of cuts is still to be implemented. We can remind you of Ed Ball's statement, the Treasurer in waiting, who says we have to show the British people that we can be tough on welfare and public spending. In other words, brothers and sisters, what we can be certain about is staying with the UK means more cuts, more poverty, more reductions in pay, more reductions in living standards. That's a certainty. There's absolutely no doubt about that. What we offer is a different prospectus. We offer the hope of a new and a better country. We offer the hope of a country, as I said earlier, that puts our people at the heart of everything we do. We have to accept that here in Scotland, and I don't care what the others will tell you, people who should know better, we in Scotland have a different political prospectus than England's got. That's just a fact. I remember getting beat at the election in 2007, and I was sad about it. I got beat with 1%, so of course I was sad about it. But I was interviewed by Bernard Ponsonby, STV, and he said, "Tommy, how are you feeling today? You must be disappointed." And I said, "Yes, personally I am disappointed that I've lost a seat. But I'm not disappointed that Scotland has moved to the left." Because let's be honest about it. The SNP fought the election in 2007 on unilateral nuclear disarmament, rejection of PFI, a higher minimum wage, no privatisation of public services. All of the things that Labour used to fight elections on. And what happened? They became the biggest party. That's a move to the left. And me as a socialist, okay, personally disappointed. But the bigger picture was that Scotland had moved and embraced policies that were about community values, that were about caring about your neighbour. I've got to laugh every time I hear this statement. Oh, let's reject the nanny state. Well, what is the bloody nanny state? Surely the nanny state is when a wee kid comes into school and he's got some bruises on him, then the teachers report that and the health workers get involved and they try and make sure that kid's alright. What is the nanny state? But making sure that pensioners who are frail and elderly don't live on their own and nobody checks on them. We actually have a welfare system that looks after the elderly and the infirm. What the hell's wrong with a nanny state? I want a nanny state that looks after working class folk. That's the values, the communitarian values that exist here in Scotland. We have an opportunity, brothers and sisters, to keep that communitarian value strong. And I would argue that the way to sum up what faces us is hope over fear. That's what we've got here on the 18th of September. Hope of a new and a better Scotland, a socially just Scotland, or the fear that we're not big enough or good enough to stand on our own 2 feet. Brothers and sisters, my clarion call to you tonight is to embrace the freedom to show that we are strong enough, we are big enough, we are courageous enough to stand on our own 2 feet and to embrace our destiny to become an independent country on September 18th. Thanks very much.